Hey everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. You probably have already done this, but please put your phones away and make sure that they're turned off right now. All right, you all. I have had the honor and the pleasure this year of working with Laurel. Laurel is a fantastic artist. Laurel is also a fantastic storyteller and a really fantastic writer. And I think what's most important about Laurel's work is that she doesn't sort of just rest on her talents, which she has a lot of talents. She continually works to develop those talents and challenge the things that are happening to all of us. And she does that through her stories and through her illustrations. And you'll see within this graphic novel that she's worked on that a lot of those have come out and come together. So without ado, Laurel.
Hi, I'm Laurel, and thanks for coming to see my presentation. I'm going to be talking about my senior project, Symbiosis. And here is an overarching view of what the project looks like before we really get into it. So what does symbiosis mean? Symbiosis is the living together of two dissimilar organisms living in close physical association, oftentimes to the advantage of both, or a mutually beneficial relationship between different people or groups. So this project blends a lot of sci-fi elements with character-driven storytelling, so I think this title works really well, and you'll see what I mean as we get further into the presentation. So, what sort of project am I making? Well, it's structured like a graphic novel, but this wasn't really about making a publishable final product. It was more about developing the story in what I thought was the best way possible. So some of my core ideas going into this project were a post-apocalyptic vibe, but avoiding certain tropes I don't like very much, and with a focus on character development and slice-of-life storytelling. So my goal was to complete 3 chapters and a detailed outline of the whole story. I'm going to be presenting my process in 3 parts. In reality, there was a lot more overlap and the parts were very intertwined. This is just to make things easier to view. So part 1 was preparation. You can start off with some of the media I was inspired by, such as Nazca of the Valley of the Wind, a Studio Ghibli movie. I was very inspired by the visuals in this. Cormac McCarthy's award-winning novel, The Road, which is a story about a man and son traveling through a wasteland. And also these specific episodes of Adventure Time, if anyone remembers these, I watched these when I was a kid, and big impact, I think. Also, I took a lot of inspiration from video games, like The Last of Us, which is kind of a given if you know anything about apocalypse media. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which has very beautiful art and a really cool melancholic vibe. And also Hollow Knight, which is similar. And I also read a bunch of graphic novels to familiarize myself with the medium. These are some of my favorites. From there, I made a ton of sketches. I actually got a sketchbook specifically for this project. I started out with the main characters because that's what I was most comfortable with. And from there, I did a bunch of scenery sketches. This was very early world building and concept art. I had to draw the characters 1,000 times. It's a comic. You have to make sure the designs are simplified enough for me to draw over and over again. And so after all my ideas were externalized in my sketchbook, I could finally start on the most complex part, which was part 2, the writing. So I wanted to do a sort of genre subversion. The thing is, post-apocalypse fiction is my favorite genre, but it's also my least favorite genre. And why is that? Let's talk about it. We can start with some prose. There's very cool settings. I love the grungy, overgrown, abandoned places. There tend to be super compelling characters, and there's just a lot of potential for drama and emotion in the story, which, obviously because it's the end of the world and everything. But I also have some issues with it. So here's the cons. There's a lot of violence for shock value. I know you might say of course there's violence, it's the end of the world. Which I know that makes sense, but I just think there's a lot of other ways to make a story interesting than just violence over and over and over again. Also, there's just a ton of nihilism, and I just don't think we need that energy right now with the state of the world. Can we have a little hope, please? And also, humans are often portrayed as super inherently violent, and I really disagree with this. I think humans are pack-based creatures. We actually strive a lot for community and togetherness. So I don't think we're super evil. So how was I going to subvert this genre? I wanted to sort of portray humans in a more positive light, but my story is meant to be post-nuclear apocalypse, and how would a world that horribly devastated even find a way to recover? It was pretty clear that it was time for me to do some world building. So the most important part of my world building maybe was this specific fungus that I've been researching. And it's radiotrophic. It was found on the grounds of Chernobyl, and it basically like eats radiation and turns into energy. And it's actually been explored as like a possible sustainable way to clean up irradiated land, which is super cool. And also, it's very under-researched at the moment, which might sound bad, but as a sci-fi writer, it's actually so perfect because it means I can get really like creative with the way I implement this in my world building, and ended up being super important to the story. So speaking of the story, let's talk about our main characters. There's two of them. So first is Oliver. I was talking about trope subversion earlier. This character is also a trope subversion. So most protagonists of this genre are like these grizzled old men who have guns and like don't talk about their feelings ever. And this character is kind of the opposite of that. He's a teenager. He's actually not really good at looking out for himself. He's also super in tune with his emotions. Some things about him are he drives a van, he lives a very nomadic lifestyle, he's just a very compassionate guy. He has a deep-seated fear of loneliness, and he's super isolated and desperate for connection at the start of the story, but luckily he does not have to make the journey alone, because we have our second protagonist, Seven. So Seven is a very mysterious 10-year-old child, and he only remembers bits and pieces of his past, most of which are unpleasant. But despite this, he's joyful and full of wonder. He wants to learn about every little thing he encounters in the world. He generally just has a big personality and imagination. Some things about him are he's very loud and talkative, he likes drawing pictures, and he has a toy he takes with him everywhere. He's also very motivated to learn about his past, which is a big driving force in the story. And honestly, like the most important part of my writing possibly was the character relationships and the character interactions. So I wanted the characters to feel like real people who are like complex and have dreams and fears and interests. And in order to do that, I really feel like the relationship was really important. I wanted to develop this sort of like sibling dynamic between them as well, because I thought that would be really interesting to explore. And I focused a lot on these very subtle character interactions, almost like these slice of life moments that are just super important to understanding the characters. And I know I said there were two protagonists, but there's also kind of three, because I started seeing the world itself as its own separate character. It sort of develops and changes and has a key role in the themes of the story, kind of like a character would. You know, it suffered this horrific nuclear disaster that like destroyed the biosphere, but it's also slowly healed itself, and I think it's almost kind of like a character arc, and it's also very in line with the themes of the story, so I sort of saw it as like separate entity thing. So here's sort of like, if this was a book, this would be on the back. Like this is a back of the book kind of plot. I'll just read it out loud. One day while out exploring the ruins of the old world, 17-year-old Oliver comes across a recently abandoned bunker. In it, he finds a peculiar lost child named Seven who claims to have almost no memory of his past. Feeling obligated to help someone so defenseless, Oliver assists Seven in a search to find the bunker's original inhabitants. Along the way, the pair form a strong bond as they unravel a mystery that has unknowingly taken root all across the land. Together, they must face both humanity's atrocities as well as their own past in order to find peace and healing. So that ends the writing section. And we can now go to part 3, which is the actual making of like the actual artwork. We finally got there. So the first thing I did was I made this timeline, and I actually have it with me. I'm gonna pull it out. And it's huge, you can see it's literally huge. And I really wanted to make it physically because all these ideas have just been bouncing around like in my head. Oh, thank you. And I just wanted to have them externalized somewhere, so I made it physical. And I also color-coded it. So there's a seasonal cycle in the story where each season has sort of like a thematic meaning. So that's color-coded. I also color-coded each chapter to be either a green chapter or a yellow chapter. So green chapters are like super plot heavy and they're a lot longer, lots of like lore and stuff. And then the yellow chapters are like the short slice of life moments. I really wanted to make sure I had a balance of these two because I think they're both equally as important to the story. So there's that. Now we can get into making an actual episode. I call them episodes, they're also kind of chapters. I call them episodes because they're kind of concentrated, like beginning, middle, end stories, even though they are part of the greater narrative. So I start out writing scripts for the dialogue, which is sort of like a screenplay pretty much. I also thumbnail each page of every chapter. If you don't know what thumbnailing is, it's basically like making a tiny rough sketch to like outline the composition. So in this case, that's mostly like panel layout and speech bubbles and stuff like that. From there, I go on to the inking, and I really wanted to ink like traditionally on paper instead of digitally because I think this allows me to like add a lot more texture into the lines, and I also really like the sort of like wobbliness of all the lines and all the imperfections. I think that's like stylistically, I really enjoy that. And then I scan all of my ink work into a digital program because I do love digital art for color a lot. Digital art has like kind of endless possibilities for color, which is really important because I use color to establish the tone in these scenes, and I need to be able to experiment with it a lot very easily. It's also just a lot more efficient than like painting or using markers or colored pencils. I also got to use this font, which I made out of my handwriting, which is pretty cool. So what I completed in my goals moving forward, and I did complete my goal of 3 chapters in a timeline, and you already saw the timeline. So that's pretty cool. Moving forward, I want to keep chipping away at this project, and maybe one day I'll even have a final product. You did see there were a lot of chapters, so it's not going to happen overnight, but I'm definitely going to work on it. And if you want to see what the chapters like physically look like, they are hung up on my wall from the art show still, at least some pages are. So if you're curious and you haven't seen that yet. So this is where you can keep up with my progress. I have 2 Instagram accounts, Laurel Tree Art, which is like a general art account that I recently made, and then Symbiosis Comic, which is like more of a collection of work specific to this. Both of these accounts are very new, but I do plan to like post on them like pretty consistently and just like keep up with that. And there's a little bit of stuff posted to the comic Instagram account already too, if you want to check that out. And thanks for listening, and yeah. Johnny has like little goodies he's gonna hand out that I made, and we also go to the Q&A period of this. Zoe?
Did you when you started this project, did you have like a set character design already in mind, or did like character design kind of change throughout your process of developing?
I'll say I actually this project can be traced back to like some really early illustrations I made in like late sophomore year and then early junior year, and I just had I always loved the whole overgrown ruins vibe, so I had these vague characters that I would just put in for the sake of the illustration, and I ended up workshopping them a lot. The designs had definitely shifted, but the original beta designs were back then. Alex?
I had a question. I just think it's really cool being in art lab in sophomore year, and we're doing our storytelling unit, and your big goal was, you said, in senior year I really want to make a comic. That's my big dream, and 3 years in the making. I feel like this is such a wonderful product, and you did such an amazing job. And it was just really cool to see your process, doing it, not doing it, but being along there with you while you were making everything for this comic. It's beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sticks?
So you mentioned a mushroom. What is it called?
So like I said, it's pretty under-researched. I can literally only find the scientific name, and I don't remember what the scientific name is, but the keyword is radiotrophic. Radiotrophic fungus, just look that up, and if you're curious about researching it. Yeah. Aiden?
I just wanted to, I remember on Discord when you first presented I don't know his name, Seven. But I remember calling him little gremlin guy, and my question was, what was the hardest part for you?
I think the hardest part was just getting the confidence to actually make something that is meant to be taken seriously, especially with comics. I feel using storytelling is very vulnerable for me, even though they're fictional characters, they feel like my babies. So actually getting myself to do these very plot important chapters, I don't know, emotionally, it's almost embarrassing. I was what am I doing? Why am I taking this so seriously? So I had to get through that feeling. I definitely think Johnny helped a lot with that because he was boosting my confidence a lot. So that was probably the hardest part for me. Yeah.
How long did each panel take? I can't even.
Yeah, it's hard to say because there's such a long process. The thumbnailing goes pretty quickly, and the script writing goes pretty quickly for me too, because I have a pretty good understanding, actually a very good understanding of who the characters are, so it's easy for me to figure out what they would say dialogue-wise. The part that took the longest would always be the coloring, because I'm very indecisive with coloring, and I would change the palette 3 different times. So that ended up taking I don't know about each panel or each page, but each chapter took like at least a month to make, usually a little more for the longer ones. Yeah. Sticks?
Back again. How did you like figure out sort of like what was your process in going from like original just little guy rules in the margins of a physics notebook to like, okay, these are the solidified like model sheets?
Honestly, the process was a lot like more streamlined than you might think, because even when I'm just drawing my little doodles, I always have like some lore in my head for them. Like I'm always making it up as I go. Story is like always present in every single one of my drawings. Like I have some idea of the character. They might not have a name and a full backstory, but like I know about them. Like I know kind of who they are as a person, at least a little bit. So even in those like super early days, I had like the vague idea of like there's this pair of characters and they're like traveling and they're maybe siblings or something, like, and they have this relationship and the world kind of looks like this. And then it was just a matter of like refining everything. So, one more. Yeah.
How did you separate character development with like the timeline and pacing of the story as well as world building and all that fun stuff?
Oh yeah, so they were definitely like very deeply intertwined. I think the fact that there's so much like slice of life in my story makes it a lot like more simple for me to like make sure the character development doesn't get forgotten in favor of like the story and the lore. Because since the characters are so like deeply involved with the world and like with this story, a lot of like the progression of plot is like very much like the same as the progression of the characters like arcs. So thank you.